explore this cultural phenomenon. Let me just start off with this broad topic of interest. Why is everyone infatuated with true crime?
Well, I think it's partly because we're infatuated with narrative, and the fundamental narrative is good versus evil, right? It's human choice in a domain characterized by good versus evil. And so the true crime genre is a variant of that, and it concentrates on, well, both usually, because there's an evil character and then there's the good forces attempting to bring him down. And I think it's indicative of the fundamental structure of human experience, but it's also morally salutary in that to understand evil is also to understand good, at least as its opposite. And I think that evil in some sense is more believable. It's more immediate, it's more visceral, it's more undeniable, it's more short-term. And people often have direct contact with it in one form or another. And it's part of, and to be fascinated by that is to be fascinated by the moral structure of the world. And given that you need an aim in life, that you need a moral goal, that you need a noble moral goal in order to live properly, you have to distinguish between good and evil, and the easiest way to start to do that is to start to understand what constitutes evil. We're also fascinated by true crime stories because we want to identify the predator. You know, I mean, human beings are prey animals as well as predators, and the worst of all predators are human predators by a remarkably substantial margin. We don't have to worry too much about being eaten by wolves, but we do have some reasonable probability of encountering malevolent people. And so we need to understand the nature of the predatory. And so it's the same thing we do when we go to horror movies to inoculate ourselves against our fear of death or disgust. You know, we have to expose ourselves to these realities of the world so that we're not as naive, and we're not the naive sitting ducks that we might otherwise be.
You've worked in prisons.
Briefly.
Briefly. You've been exposed to people who did very bad things.
Yes.
What was that like? What was it like knowing they could harm you?
Well, that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part for me was that they weren't that much different than me. I mean, that's the first thing I learned when I spent some time in a maximum security prison working part-time for a psychologist back in the 1980s. They were a very violent criminal that I met, and they're a very small guy, very unassuming person who had taken two cops out and made them dig their own graves and shot them while they were begging for their lives, making reference to their families by his own testimony. And it was very difficult for me to reconcile this rather unassuming small person with this monster. And at the same time, two other prisoners that I met, they had taken a third down and pulverized his leg with a lead pipe because they thought he was a stool pigeon, and he might have been that, and who knows. But I spent a lot of time meditating on that, trying to understand how it is that anyone could do that. It seemed beyond me. It seemed like something I could not manage, that I could not do. And I actually thought about doing that for weeks after that experience. And what I realized...
About killing somebody?
About both, about killing someone and about the torture. And I eventually realized that I could do it, and that it would be easier than I thought. And that was very, very shocking. I've never forgotten that. And so that part's there in all of us, and it can come out, it's there more in some people than in others. You know, there are people who are prone to violence. Well, I can tell you, here's one thing that's useful to know. If you take 2-year-olds and you put them in a room, there's a small proportion of the 2-year-olds, almost all male, who have a proclivity to kick, hit, bite, and steal, essentially. They're very dominant, aggressive children, and they're almost all male, about 5% of males. And the vast majority of them are socialized by the time they're 4. And so it's possible to socialize even the aggressive males. But there's a small proportion of them who don't become socialized, and then they become alienated from their peer group because no one can be friends with them, and they become habitual criminals. And after 4, it looks like there's very little that can be done to put them back together, because so much of what happens to you after 4 is dependent on peer socialization. And if you're isolated from your peers, then you don't get socialized.
So just to be clear on this, because I was always curious how much of being a killer is genetic and how much of it is the nurture. If, let's just say, 1 in 20 males at age 2 is prone to becoming a bad apple, and most of them get better by 4, that makes me feel nurture is important.
Yes, definitely. No doubt about it.
But the fact that only 1 in 20 had the predisposition to begin with means there's a genetic element as well.
Yes, definitely. Well, men are definitely more aggressive than women, which is why so many more men are in prison. The personality traits that go along with that are, in all likelihood, high levels of emotional stability, so low neuroticism, very little fear, low levels of agreeableness, so those are people who are harsh and brusque, but who also tend to tell hard truths and to be able to make hard decisions. There's real advantages to that, but then also low conscientiousness. That's a bad triad of traits for criminal behavior. But most of the boys who show violent traits when they're 2, and 2-year-olds, by the way, are the most violent of human beings. If you group kids together by age, the 2-year-olds engage in by far the largest number of violent interactions. But it's a small minority. But most of that can be brought under control.
Is that why we seem to see amongst these serial killers people who are often in respected positions of society, police officers, politicians? That some of those traits seem to overlap?
Well, the serial killers, like the problem with assessing those sorts of people is that they're so statistically rare that it's hard to draw any firm conclusions from it. I mean, I've thought about it's a very tough one. They get hooked on it. They get hooked on the desire for the novelty of more and more outrageous acts. That's part of it, and that would be the true serial killer type. And there's often a really powerful sexual component that goes along with that. Mm-hmm. So something's gone wrong with their psychosexual development at a very early age, and they become sadistic, and there's a sexual pleasure in that. And sex often involves domination and submission. It's part of the sexual game, and so they represent an extraordinarily extreme variant of that. The mass murderer types, they're usually more generally vengeful and angry about the structure of the world. And those are often the quiet people that you hear about that never caused any trouble, who are actually harboring immense amounts of resentment about the structure of the world, like Cain, and who are brooding in their basements or in their lonely existences for months, fantasizing. And this is that invitation of evil into your life, right? They start to become vengeful. They desire destruction. They start to fantasize about that, and then they start to live in that fantasy. And that fantasy grows and grows and grows and grows, and they entice it, invite it along until it dominates them completely. And then they have a plan, and then they execute the plan, and then it's mayhem everywhere. And what they're aiming at is the mayhem, no doubt about it.
Amongst the serial killers, when we look at their stories, their version of what happened, they seem to often have had big-time problems with their mother, not with their father. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that might be?
Well, it's definitely the case that one of the best...
What the fuck? I just took a picture of myself. It's cool the screen gets all bright just to fucking mimic a flash, I guess. Anyways, what's up? Yeah, okay, I look alright. Oh, such a Taurus. Alright, sorry everybody. So I want to talk about something important today. Actually, everything I talk about is important, so what the fuck am I talking about? Alright. Trees on. Pentagrams on. I got powers on. Wedding ring, because I love my crazy wife, is on. Buddha's with me. Well, this is a dragon, but it's part of something to do with Buddhism, and I'm not going to try to dishonor that tradition by pretending I know a lot about it. I do know a lot about the philosophy of Buddhism, kind of like a nutshell, packaged, crappily version, from what I learned in school doing world religions to what I study whenever you look for something, when you're actively looking for something that you want to know, you tend to find the things that reinforce what you already know and what you want to hear. And that's why I say what I'm saying. The version of Buddhism that I know is the version I want to know, you know, so I can easily say every religion's got a piece of the truth, and you put them all together. It's just not always the case, but, you know, it's something, now that I'm more depolarized, I'd have to look into actively and see all the good and bad of every religion, really. And I welcome everybody to try something like that, to actually look at every religion and just information in general. You know, when you type in a search, whatever you're looking for, and you get a bunch of titles, and you pick the one that you think is going to do the best, and then you start listening to shit, and nope, not this one, and it's probably giving you information you don't like, and nope, not this one, and all of a sudden someone has your same mindset and opinion, and you keep it on. So that's kind of what I mean. But anyway, that's not what I want to talk about. What you just heard was the man, Peterson, my fellow Canadian, love that guy, talking to Dr. Oz. And I've played this before, and I've said this before, that this is crucial for every parent to know. If your kid, before the age of 4, doesn't get rough and tumble play enough, then they won't develop certain brain circuitry to be able to socialize with other children, right? And then they won't have friends, and it's going to fuck them up for years to come, okay? I've made that point very clear. Now, I watched that this morning after making the video last night about, well, 2 videos last night about the whole drug addict and the neural pathways not being created whenever your parents are either neglecting you or not even on purpose. Maybe they're working to survive because they got bills to pay and they just weren't there enough. But it wasn't their fault. They were trying to do right by you. But the baby knows that something's wrong, you know, and it could be just society in general is wrong. But I digress. But the point I was trying to get at was, you know, don't neglect your kids. Well, and then a long time ago, I made episodes about what Peterson says. Your kid has to be socialized by the age of 4. If not, they're going to have a hard time at it. So your kid has to have a little bit of rough and tumble play. Because, once again, what you do, think about it this way. If your father or mother are not there, or you have them, and they never wrestle with you, play fight with you, or whatever, and they just say, fighting's bad, no fighting, not even a little bit of wrestling, okay? You get to school, people are fighting, you don't get involved. But, you know, something's like, oh, it looks kind of like fun, but not allowed to do it, it's bad. And then the first time you do it, maybe you're really good at it, maybe you get your ass whooped, maybe everybody makes fun of you. It doesn't matter. Either one of those scenarios is going to end up by you slowly fighting, punching people, choking people over and over again until you become either a really violent person and it's fun to do and hurt people and hit because you never got to express it earlier. You never got to do a little bit of a loud, normal, little bit of wrestling and fighting and play fighting. Kids are testing their limits. How far can I push this thing I have that called the body before it starts to hurt, you know? And so they'll poke their dad or their mom, or they'll push their siblings or whatever, and they'll punch, and this bigger sibling will just wait, and then crack them, you know? And then the kid stops. If you don't experience that, if the kids aren't experiencing that, then they're gonna have a hard time of it. In addition to that, there's a social aspect. There's a reason why kids start school at age 4. Fuck, now that I think of it, if what he's saying is true, we should almost start them at 3. But anyways, point I'm trying to get at is, if you take what he just said, and I'll play a small clip of it just so you know exactly what part I'm talking about. But if kids don't get socialized, most violent kids, all violent kids, the most violent group of kids is 2-year-olds, according to him, according to the studies he's seen. And most of those are men. Not all, but most. And they'll steal, they'll punch, they'll kick. That's where the thoughts go. They want to do the hitting stuff. And that's why from 2 to 4, you gotta manage that. Okay, hit me, whatever, hit me. Give them a little crack back. Oh, they stop. You know, they know the limits, and then they start realizing, oh, if I hit, they hit back. that's a good thing in my mind, but I won't go there. I'm not saying to hit your kids or anything like that. I'm just giving you hypothetical scenarios. But if you put social distancing into the scope of things, here's another reason why staying at home and homeschooling your kids, and I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm telling you right now, I'm actually thinking about homeschooling my kids, and that's one of the reasons why I'm doing research like this, to see the pros and cons. And I want an excuse to stay home and homeschool my kid. I really do. So looking at this differing information that goes against what I want to do is really hard, but I'm doing it because that's what well-balanced people do. They don't just pick the side that they think makes most sense and run with it and just defend it like they're supposed to defend it, like it's their existence depends on defending that. And that's just stupidity. That's just ideology. That's just ignorance. But as much as I want to stay home with my kid, I don't want my daughter to be not socialized properly and end up becoming a violent offender. And if you listen to what Jordan Peterson says in this little clip that I'm going to show again, this is information you should look up yourself. Not take my word, not take Jordan's word for it, none of that. And you can say, well, how is me staying at home with my kid going to turn him into a violent offender? Well, if they don't get to interact with other children, play, get rough, get into fist fights, make friends, what happens when you send a 10-year-old back to school because you have to work? Maybe one parent dies, the other parent can't keep doing it, whatever the case is, and they've never been around other kids. Well, he's going to be a weird little fucker, and no one's going to want to hang out with them. So because you want to protect your child and you want to stay home with your child, and that's honorable and that's beautiful and that's a wonderful thing, that there's so many parents that care about their kids so much that they don't want them to get hurt. Like, that's beautiful. I understand that. And this is where the eatable mother who loves her kids so much she eats them, which basically means you love your kids so much that you're going to hurt them by homeschooling them when you don't know what the fuck you're doing, or you don't know the psychological effects it's going to have on them. So before you start looking at curriculums and things like that, just a thought, maybe start looking at books about your children's psychology and why interacting with students, let alone the curriculum and the teachers and all the bullshit that goes along with it, because I know there's fucking huge holes in our system. But the fact that most people come out sociable, and yeah, we're seeing more and more people that are having issues and these new designer fucking diseases, ADD, ADHD, and shit like that. But that's not because of our system. If anything, when most people went to school, like my parents' age, and probably, anybody who's in their 30s to 50s, their parents, when they all went to school, yeah, they dropped out early and they worked the rest of their life, but there was less diseases then when all those people were going to school versus now when people can drop out and do what they want, go on disability, people are hitting their kids, teach them right from wrong, blah, 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 blah. So just do your research on it. Make sure you fucking really look at the child's psychology and what a child needs from what we know right now, and go with the most information. Don't find a book with someone with your opinion who may be a Christian or maybe an anti-Christian, and because you share their opinion on some things, that you take everything they say as gold. Put aside all your preconceived judgments, put aside your belief systems, put aside all your bullshit, and be a blank fucking slate, because it's about your child's welfare, okay? And I don't have the right way for you. I don't know the right way, and that's why I'm doing my research on it. And I just found it fascinating that what he says here, and I've heard this many times before, and I never put it together like this. So for another reason why social distancing is a bad thing, and I'm not saying it's not something we don't need to do, because if there is a COVID-19 out there and people are getting sick and dying, then yeah, we definitely need to stop seeing each other for a small brief time so that we can start seeing each other again. I agree with that 100%. But the problem is it's lasted so long. My kids have been home since fucking March, and they're slowly going crazy, and I don't want that for my children. So I don't care how scared you are of the fucking world, but your kids should be going to school, in my opinion. They should be around other children. And the other children, as they learn, your child learns, and they mold together. Being around adults, listening to adults 24/7, watching TV more than ever, playing video games, they're only supposed to have an hour of that a day. And they're having more time on there than there are creative time. Like I said, I have to fight with my kids to do an hour of creativity a day. But I do that fight because that is a battle worth fighting. And then I see my kids are opposite, but ask yourself, you can say, well, fuck, their kids only do creativity an hour a day. My kid the other day was drawing for 10 hours. That's awesome. Great. But does it do it every day? No. And you can diss me all you want, but at least I'm making my kids do that creativity every fucking day because I know it's good for them. And they hate me when I make them do it most of the time because they lack so much creativity, they can't even get creative about what they want to create. And it's like, do anything. Go outside and kick a soccer ball around and see how many times you can hold it up in the air. I used to do that, and I became the best hacky sacker at my fucking school. And I am still proud of that to this day. And I can kick a soccer ball. You know, it takes me a while, but I can get from 75 to 100 and keep it up in the air like that. And I'm damn proud of that. That's great foot-eye coordination, just like hand-eye coordination, you know what I mean? That's helpful for driving. And you say, well, why is your foot? Because you got to hit the gas and brake with your foot, do you not? So it's useful, no matter how you look at it. So anyways, that could be creativity. See how many times you can hit a ball up in the air using a hockey stick to hit a tennis ball up in the air, you know? Hand-eye coordination once again, get your feet involved. You know, things like that. They develop motor skills. Motor skills are good for everything. If there's one thing you should do, is develop your fucking motor skills, your hand-eye, your hand-foot, your eye-body coordination, whatever it is. But anyways, the point I'm trying to get at is let your kids be social. Let your kids socialize. If you have your kid and they want to go hang out with another kid and that parent is on board, then be on board. Let them get a little bit of germs in them. Let it bring it home. Let you be able to be around those germs without getting sick. You know, even if it breaks down your body for a little bit, your body is stronger than you fucking know. Your body can handle anything. The only thing your body can't handle is what you allow it to fuck it up. So if you allow cancer to fuck it up, if you allow flu and COVID to fuck it up, then it will get fucked up. It will. So stop allowing shit to fuck it up. Let your body do what it needs to do. Stop pretending you know what's best for everybody. Get off your high fucking horse and do some research. Negate some of the responsibility that you think you need to hold and do consciously. And it's honorable. And, you know, you're a good person for doing it. Absolutely. But you might be doing more harm than good. Don't be the mother that kills their child because they're overprotecting it. Don't be the mother that keeps the kid in the bubble from age 0 to 10. And then when they have to get out of the bubble, because eventually they have to get out of the bubble, you can't protect them all their life. So when that kid gets out of the bubble, guess what happens? The first little fucking germ that, you know, my kids that are outside eating dirt all the time, fuck, that germ doesn't even have a chance of doing anything to it. It won't even bother going in my kid because it's so scared of my kid, because it'll just destroy it. Its immune system is so fucking strong. Well, that germ's going to go to your kid because your kid hasn't built up any antibodies against it. And more than that, your kid is also now weak and doesn't have an immune system and it doesn't have any friends to even deal with that. So it's at home watching TV, being homeschooled by mommy, and it's getting sick every fucking week. Don't do that to your kid. And don't take my word for shit. Do your research. I'm not an expert, but this is what I've been doing, and my kids haven't gotten sick yet. They're stronger than ever. They, as much as they hate being at home, I let them go and do whatever they want. I'm in contact with the parents. I make sure I know where they're going to be. I make sure they're not around other people. I make sure they have a mask if they do have to go anywhere. You know, I try to cover every angle I possibly can. But at the end of the day, all you can do is protect your kids. All you can do is teach your kids, and they have to make the decisions for themselves. Anyways, this has been Corey LeBlanc. This has been my public service announcement about why social distancing for too long is going to fuck things up for our children, which means if our children's are fucked up, our future is fucked up. So when you get reincarnated and you become your kid's kid, and they're fucked right up, and you're like, wow, how did I raise such a fucking retard? It's like, well, it's the retard that raised them that made the new retard. And I don't mean retard because that's a bad word, and I don't believe in that. I got nothing but love for specially and handicapped people, and I have fought a lot for them and used to get mad when people made fun of them at my school, to the point where I've gotten suspended for knocking a motherfucker out, for teasing them and doing things to piss them off. So when I say that, I don't mean that in any disrespect to anybody who's mentally challenged. I just mean a person who's supposed to be normal who acts like they're mentally ill. Anyways, have a good fucking day.
Eventually realized that I could do it and that it would be easier than I thought. And that was very, very shocking. I've never forgotten that. And so that part's there in all of us, and it can come out. It's there more in some people than in others. You know, there are people who are prone to violence. Well, I can tell you, here's one thing that's useful to know. If you take 2-year-olds and you put them in a room, there's a small proportion of the 2-year-olds, almost all male, who have a proclivity to kick, hit, bite, and steal, essentially. They're very dominant, aggressive children. And they're almost all male, about 5% of males. And the vast majority of them are socialized by the time they're 4. And so it's possible to socialize even the aggressive males. But there's a small proportion of them who don't become socialized. And then they become alienated from their peer group because no one can be friends with them. And they become habitual criminals. And after 4, it looks like there's very little that can be done to put them back together. Because so much of what happens to you after 4 is dependent on peer socialization. And if you're isolated from your peers, then you don't get socialized.
So just to be clear on this, because I was always curious how much of being a killer is genetic and how much of it is the nurture. If, let's just say, 1 in 20 males at age 2 is prone to becoming a bad apple, and most of them get better by 4, that makes me feel nurture is important.
Yes, definitely. No doubt about it.
But the fact that only 1 in 20 had the predisposition to begin with means there's a genetic element as well.
Yes, definitely. Well, you know, I mean, men are definitely more aggressive than women, which is why so many more men are in prison. The personality traits that go along with that are, in all likelihood, high levels of emotional stability, so low neuroticism, very little fear. Low levels of agreeableness, so those are people who are harsh and brusque, but who also tend to tell hard truths and to be able to make hard decisions. There's real advantages to that, but then also low conscientiousness. That's a bad triad of traits for criminal behavior. But most of the boys who show violent traits when they're 2, and 2-year-olds, by the way, are the most violent of human beings. If you group kids together by age, the 2-year-olds engage in by far the largest number of violent interactions. But it's a small minority. But most of that can be brought under control.
Is that why we seem to see amongst these serial killers people who are often in respected positions of society, police officers, politicians, that some of those traits seem to overlap?
Well, the serial killers, like the problem with assessing those sorts of people is that they're so statistically rare that it's hard to draw any firm conclusions from it. I mean, I've thought about